Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our channel, where stories aren't just told, they're felt. If you're someone who believes in empathy, justice, and truth, you're in the right place. What would you do if at the airport a pilot in full uniform looked you up and down, sneered, and told you to buy a real ticket before ripping up your first-class boarding pass? What if in that moment of public humiliation with dozens of phones recording, you had the power to turn the entire situation upside down because you own the airline? Before we get into the full story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. If the story touched something in you, if it opened your eyes, stirred your heart, or simply made you pause, we invite you to leave a meaningful response. And if you feel the story missed a layer, lacked context, or could speak deeper truths, share your perspective in the comments. Your support helps us bring more real voices, raw truths, and honest conversations to light. Every click counts and every story matters. Now let's begin. The recycled air. Inside Chicago O'Hare International carried with it a familiar hum, an anxious electric undercurrent that only airports seem to hold. A line of restless travelers snaked around gate C-18, their rolling suitcases bumping against scuffed tile as overhead speakers mumbled indistinguishable announcements. But for one woman, the noise felt far away, like the dull roar of an approaching storm. Amara Jefferson stood near the end of the first-class queue, a figure almost too easy to overlook. Her dark curls were gathered into a simple knot. Her sweatshirt and jeans, the kind you'd expect to see on a grad student or a tired mother escaping on vacation. No jewelry, no designer labels, just a battered carry-on and a calm, observant gaze. The people around her might have guessed she was flying home to see family or squeezing in a budget trip to Europe before her work calendar devoured her life again. No one looking at her would ever guess she wasn't just a passenger. She was the CEO and principal, owner of Skyward Horizons Airlines, the very company operating Flight SH-2072. Paris. She liked it that way. Anonymity, after all, was her sharpest tool. Boardrooms and quarterly reports could never tell her what travelers really felt, what her staff endured on the ground, or where the cracks in her airline's promises showed through. Fly incognito let her see the truth. It was a habit born not just from business strategy, but from something deeper, an echo of her late mother, Lorraine Jefferson, who had worked for decades as one of the few black women in airline operations. Lorraine had taught her daughter a lesson Amara carried into every corner of her life. Power means nothing if you can't feel the ground beneath you. But as she adjusted the strap of her bag and glanced at the churning line ahead, Amara felt the ground tremble in a different way. There was tension in the air, palpable, restless. Whispers passed between travelers about a 30-minute delay, an equipment check possible crew issue. Near the gate, Lucas, a young, visibly stressed gate agent with his tie, Esker struggled to wrangle boarding groups while juggling constant calls on his headset. Elderly passengers clutched their tickets, squinting for signage that wasn't there. The chaos felt like a symptom, the kind she had made it her mission to fix. She was here to observe quietly, take mental notes, and maybe, if all went smoothly, sleep for 7 uninterrupted hours over the Atlantic. But that peace shattered the moment Captain Vivian Cross strode into the gate area. It wasn't her height, though. At nearly 6 feet, she towered over most, or even her immaculate uniform, the gold epaulets catching the fluorescent light like medals of war. It was the way she moved, like the concourse was her personal runway, like the crowd parted because they were supposed to. There was a sharpness to her, a posture honed by decades of command, but something in her narrowed gaze made Amara's stomach tighten. Cross was a name Amara knew. Skyward senior captain with 29 years in the industry and a reputation for flawless technical skill. What the HR reports rarely captured, though, was the muttered complaints about her temperament, dismissive toward younger crew, intolerant of anyone who didn't fit her image of professional, and whispered more than once there, made cutting remarks about those people in premium cabins. She scanned the line of first-class passengers, her expression a mask of cool authority. Her eyes lingered approvingly on a pair of suited businessmen, one with silver. Watch that gleam like a trophy. She offered them a polite nod. Then her gaze slid to Amara. It paused sharp and assessing before the corners of her lips, curved not into a smile, but into a smirk so slight it could almost be missed. Almost. Amara had seen that expression before, in boardrooms, on tarmacs, in the subtle dismissals her mother had endured for years. It was a silent language of gatekeeping, the kind of arrogance that didn't need words to say, "You don't belong here." Lucas called for Group 1. Amara stepped forward, boarding pass, pulled up on her phone, the familiar skyward horizon's logo bright on the screen. She offered a calm good morning as she reached the podium. Lucas reached for his scanner, eager to get one easy interaction out of the way. But before the device could beep, Vivian Cross moved with startling speed, her polished shoes clicking against the tile. As she slid in front of the podium, hand pressing firmly on the counter. One moment. Lucas Cross said, her voice a smooth, commanding alto that cut through the den. "We're boarding first class. Passengers only right now." Her eyes locked on Amara, cool and unwavering. Amara blinked her face, a mass of polite confusion. "Yes, that's me." One, Cross let out a short, humorless laugh, the kind meant to sting. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're running, but that's a $10,000 seat. We have our manifest, and I can promise you you're not on it." She turned to Lucas, tone sharpening. "Have TSA verify her ID. We've had too many scammers trying to sneak into premium lately." A low murmur rippled through the surrounding passengers. Someone at the back of the line raised their phone, filming. A woman in a floral blouse whispered audibly. Did she just say that out loud? Amara felt the heat rising to her neck. Not from shame, but from a familiar, infuriating pattern of it all. The insinuation, the public challenge, the casual audacity of someone so certain of their hierarchy that they thought nothing of humiliating a stranger in full view of a crowd. She thought of her mother again, standing in a break room 30 years ago as a male captain told her she was lucky to even have a seat at the table, and how Lorraine had later whispered to her daughter, "You can't let their storm pull you under. Stand still. Make them see you." So Amara stood still. Her heartbeat steadied, her voice calm and even. She didn't raise it. She didn't plead. She simply looked Vivian Cross square in the eyes and said, "Captain, I suggest you let Lucas scan my boarding pass. Because the mistake you're making right now, it's one you can't take back." The terminal, already tense, seemed to still entirely. Even the overhead announcements faded into the background hum. Cross arched a brow, amused as if the woman before her had no idea who she was dealing with. She didn't yet know. She couldn't know, but she was about to. Lucas hesitated, his scanner hovering in midair, unsure whether to obey the pilot or his own instincts. The passengers waiting in line had gone quiet, their whispers thinning into a kind of expectant stillness, as if the concourse itself was holding its breath. Captain Vivian Cross took a half-step closer to the podium, her shadow cutting across Amara Jefferson's phone screen like a drawn line of finality. "Scan it if you like." Lucas Cross said, her voice smooth but laced with steel. "But let me save you the trouble. That ticket is as fake as the digital scams we deal with every week. $10,000 seats don't come with sweatshirts and scuffed sneakers. Ma'am, the economy line is over there. Buy yourself a real ticket." Her hand, elegant and sure, gestured toward the roped-off general boarding area, as if dismissing a trespasser from a private club. It was not the words alone that landed like a blade, but the tone, that calm, confident cruelty, the kind that told everyone in earshot she wasn't making a scene, she was simply keeping order. But the murmurs were louder now. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Is she serious?" while another whispered, "I Think that woman's filming. Out of the corner of her eye, Amara saw two separate phones tilted her way, their small red recording dots glowing. She could have explained herself, told Captain Cross her name, her title, her right to sit in 1A. She could have mentioned the boardroom where she'd signed off on the very aircraft Cross would fly tonight, or the billions in revenue she'd helped steer into Skyward Horizon's coffers. But what good would it do? People like Vivian Cross didn't believe words. They believed hierarchies. They believed appearances. And right now to Cross, she wasn't a CEO, or an owner, or even a valued passenger. She was a black woman in casual clothes. Standing between her and the orderly image of a premium cabin she thought she controlled. I have my boarding pass. Print it if that helps. Amara said softly, her tone measured, even polite. She unzipped her bag and produced a folded document crisp and official. Her name, Amara Jefferson, clearly printed, along with seat 1A Polaris first. She placed it on the counter, an olive branch offered not out of deference, but to speed this humiliation toward its inevitable end. Vivian Cross did not pick it up to verify it. She didn't glance at Lucas for confirmation. Instead, in a single startling motion, she snatched it from the counter, holding it aloft for a moment as if to let the crowd see her prize. Then, without breaking eye contact with Amara, she tore it clean down the middle. The sound of the paper ripping was almost unnaturally loud in the sterile gate area, followed by another tear and another until the ticket was nothing but limp shreds fluttering to the floor at Amara's feet. Counterfeit Cross announcer voice, carrying over the murmurs. Ma'am, I'm advising you to step aside before I call TSA to have you escorted out. Economy is that way where you belong. The last three words lingered in the air, heavy and unmistakable, a weight. Everyone in earshot could feel. There was no mistaking the implication. It wasn't just about the ticket. It was about her. Lucas's face had gone pale. A few feet away, an older couple in line exchanged wide-eyed glances. Someone muttered, "Did she really just say that?" Another voice from further back hissed, "That's going to blow up online." Amara looked down at the shredded paper. At her feet, for a moment, a flicker of heat flashed across her chest. That raw, reflexive anger that urged her to raise her voice to defend herself, to point to the cameras and declare who she was. But another voice, quiet and steady, rose in her memory, her mother's, Lorraine Jefferson, standing in their kitchen after a long day of fielding slights, had once told her, the most powerful voice in a storm is a calm one. Let them roar. You stay still. That's when they finally see themselves for what they are. Amara straightened her spine. She met Cross's gaze, not with fury, but with a cold, measured calm. That unsettled the older woman more than yelling ever could. Captain Cross, she said evenly, her voice cutting through the air like tempered steel. You've made a mistake you cannot undo. Cross's smirk widened a flash of triumph at what she perceived as bravado. I'll take my chances, she said, turning her attention toward Lucas. Port, authority now. Let's get this sorted before boarding is delayed further. But before Lucas could reach for his phone, Amara reached for hers. She scrolled, with deliberate precision, the bright glow of her screen, drawing the curious stares of nearby passengers. She found the contact she wanted and pressed call, placing the device on speaker for everyone to hear. The phone rang once, twice, and then a sharp, confident voice answered. Evelyn Torres came the clipped greeting of Skyward's Executive Vice President of Global Operations, a woman whose reputation for efficiency was matched only by her ferocity when her company's standards were breached. Evelyn Amara said her tone as steady as if she were discussing the weather. It's Amara. I'm at gate C-18 for flight SH-207. We have a situation. There was a beat of silence on the line, followed by Evelyn's voice sharpening. Amara, why aren't you in the air already? What's happening? The captain of tonight's flight has just torn up my boarding pass in front of dozens of passengers. Amara said her eyes never leaving Cross's. She accused me of fraud, told me to buy a ticket in economy, and for the record, Announced. That's where I belong. The murmurs around them turned into a wave, a low hum of disbelief and outrage. Vivian Cross's posture stiffened, though. Her face betrayed only the faintest trace of unease. Evelyn's voice dropped an octave. Each word deliberate. Amara, is the gate still boarding? It is, Amara said, glancing at Lucas, whose hand was frozen over his radio. For now? Not anymore, Evelyn said sharply. Ground. Flight SH-207 immediately. Retract the jet bridge. Hold all passengers. I'll assemble the executive board in 90 minutes, and security will escort you from the gate as a VVIP, not a suspect. Stand by. Lucas's radio crackled to life. Almost on cue, Central Operations, relaying Evelyn's orders. Gate C-18 per Executive Directive Flight SH-207 is now grounded. Halt all boarding. Retract the jet bridge. Await further instruction. The young agent's eyes darted to Amara, wide with both fear and awe before he began moving to comply. The gate area erupted into hushed chaos. Passengers reached for their phones, calling spouses, filming, whispering. Captain Vivian Cross's face tightened a flicker of uncertainty, finally cracking her mask. She turned toward Amara, her voice lower, now edged with irritation and something else, a shadow of doubt. What exactly are you pulling here? She asked, her composure faltering. Amara didn't blink. She simply slipped her phone into her pocket, her expression calm, her eyes steady and unyielding. I'm not pulling anything, Captain, she said softly, but you are about to learn who you just humiliated, and by the time this is over, you'll wish all you had done was tear up a ticket. The terminal was silent, except for the hiss of the retracting jet bridge. The storm now fully gathered, and in that heavy pause, even those who didn't know Amara's name understood. Whatever was about to unfold, it wouldn't be quiet. The steel and glass facade of Skyward Horizon, Chicago. Headquarters gleamed under gray midday sky, its 50 floors rising above. The bustle of downtown. Inside, the air was cool, clinical, and thrumming with a tension that no amount of soft carpeting or muted decor could disguise. At the center of it all, in a vast boardroom that could seat 30 executives, Amara Jefferson stood at the head of a polished mahogany table, her presence transformed. Gone was the casual sweatshirt and jeans that had marked her as out of place at O'Hare. Now she wore a deep navy pantsuit, tailored to perfection, her natural curls swept into a sleek bun. Her quiet strength filled the room, not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't need to. Around her sat the airline's most powerful figures, board members, senior executives, legal counsel. Some more expressions of shock, others quiet anger as they flipped through the reports Evelyn Torres had distributed. At the far end of the table, Robert Langford, Skyward's chief legal officer, scanned a tablet filled with FAA regulations and internal protocols, his brows furrowed as if each new piece of evidence deepened a wound. The hum of tension was broken only by the faint clicks of pens and the muted tapping of Evelyn's manicured fingers against the screen of her own device as she queued up testimony. The door opened and Captain Vivian Cross entered her, posture rigid, her chin tilted just enough to mimic composure. She wore her uniform like armor, her cap tucked beneath one arm, but the faint pore of her face betrayed the cracks beneath the facade. Her eyes swept the room, lingering on the board members, avoiding Amara entirely as she took the empty chair across the table. There was a time when Cross's rank and seniority commanded deference here, when her decades of accident-free flights and countless accolades made her untouchable. Today, those shields felt paper-thin. Captain Cross, Robert Langford, began, his voice calm, precise, every syllable sharpened by years of courtroom experience. Before we proceed, I need to inform you that this session is being recorded and documented for both internal and regulatory purposes. What you say here may be shared with the FAA and, if necessary, the TSA. Cross's jaw tightened. Understood? She said, her voice clipped, still carrying a trace of defiance. Amara didn't speak at first. She let the Weight of the silence settled her steady gaze fixed on Cross, not hostile but unyielding as Evelyn Torres began the methodical presentation of evidence. First, the gate agent's statement. Evelyn said, her tone cool and professional as she tapped her tablet. Lucas's voice filled the room from the recording, nervous but unwavering, as he recounted how Cross intercepted Amara, blocked the scan of her boarding pass, and declared her ticket fraudulent before tearing it apart. His words painted a picture that was already damning, but Evelyn didn't pause before, moving to the next piece. Second First Officer Aiden Patel's testimony. She continued, activating the next recording. Patel's voice was steadier, but the discomfort in it was unmistakable. After returning to the cockpit, he said, Captain Cross told me, quote, some girl from the south side tried to fake her way into 1A. I put her back in her place. She was laughing when she said it. She told me to always trust your gut. About people like that. The boardroom was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. A muscle flickered in Cross's jaw. That first officer is a rookie trying to earn points, she said sharply. He doesn't understand the instinct a senior pilot relies on to humiliate paying passengers in front of a terminal full of witnesses. Robert Langford interjected, his voice cutting like glass to destroy an official boarding pass, which as you well know is a federally controlled travel document. He paused deliberately. Captain Cross, do you understand that by tearing that pass, you not only violated company policy, but triggered a federal security breach that we were legally obligated to report? The FAA does not view such actions lightly. Cross faltered, her lips parted as if to respond, but no sound came. Her gaze darted briefly toward the board members, searching for some trace of sympathy, some signal that her years of service might buy her grace. She found none. Amara finally spoke, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. Captain Cross, you said at the gate that I didn't fit the profile of a first-class passenger. Describe for this board what that profile is. Cross hesitated, her fingers tightening around the brim of her cap. It's not about race, she began, her voice defensive. It's about presentation, demeanor. Our premium clients are typically executives, high net worth, individuals, people who wear suits, people who look like those men. You nodded to while you looked me up and down. Amara's words were calm, each syllable deliberate. Or is it something else, Captain? Something you won't say aloud unless you think no one's listening. Evelyn's fingers danced across her tablet again. From the speakers came Patel's recorded words once more. Some girl from the south side. Put her back in her place. The phrase hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Cross's face drained of color. He's twisting my words, she said, though her voice was thinner now, the iron edge dulled. I was protecting the integrity of the flight. Robert Langford cut her off. Integrity doesn't involve racial innuendo. It doesn't involve abandoning your pre-flight duties to override a credential gate agent. It certainly doesn't involve tearing up a boarding pass, a violation that could cost you your license before the FAA even reviews the rest of this case. Amara stepped closer, not looming, but commanding all attention without raising her voice. You saw a black woman in a sweatshirt and sneakers. You didn't see a passenger. You didn't see the owner of the airline you represent. You saw someone who didn't belong in your world. And you acted on that bias in front of witnesses, staff, and cameras. You didn't just tear a piece of paper, Captain. You tore through the values this company stands for. The room was so silent that the faint hum of traffic far below could be heard through the glass walls. Cross looked from face to face, seeking any trace of rescue. All she saw were the same grim expressions, each one a verdict waiting to be spoken. For the first time in her long career, Captain Vivian Cross felt truly weightless, not soaring, but plummeting the gravity of her arrogance, pulling her down faster than she'd ever imagined. And as Amara held her gaze, calm and resolute, she realized the storm she thought she controlled had just broken over her, and there would be no escape from the reckoning that followed. The decision came not with fireworks or shouting, but with a measured finality that fell heavier than any raised voice could have. Robert Langford, seated beside Amara, delivered the words with clinical precision, as though each one carried a signature weight. Captain Vivian Cross, effective immediately that your employment with Skyward Horizons is terminated for cause. A full report has already been filed with the FAA regarding your actions at O'Hare. They will determine whether your license remains valid, but I would prepare for the possibility that your flying career is at an end. His tone did not waver, not even when Cross's shoulders tightened as if absorbing the impact of a physical blow. Evelyn Torres added the final detail, her voice as cold as the tempered glass walls surrounding the boardroom. Due to the direct financial damage caused by your actions, the grounding of Flight SH-207 passenger rebooking costs, airport penalties, Skyward will be seeking recovery of $310. In damages, we've initiated a lien against your pension to satisfy this debt. For a brief flickering second, Vivian Cross looked less like a decorated captain and more like a woman, staring down a cliff she hadn't realized was behind her. The carefully maintained mask she had worn for decades, a certainty that her seniority could shield her from consequence, cracked. She tried to form a protest, a plea, something that might frame her as misunderstood rather than culpable. But no one at the table was waiting to hear her defense. Even the few executives who had long respected her discipline and skill kept their gazes lowered. Security entered quietly, two uniformed officers who did not touch her, but waited patiently the way one might stand beside a fallen monument awaiting removal. Cross gathered her cap and jacket with rigid movements, the smallest tremor in her hands, betraying the fury and disbelief she refused to show on her face. She didn't look at Amara as she left the boardroom, escorted to the hushed hallways that had once felt like part of her domain. In the days that followed, the fall became complete. Her pilot's license, suspended pending investigation, was ultimately revoked by the FAA after their review of the gate incident and her destruction of a federally controlled travel document. The union, despite decades of dues, declined to mount a serious defense, calling her actions a breach too severe to contest. Her husband, weary of the cloud of scandal and financial ruin looming over their lives, filed for divorce and moved out within a month. The lakefront condo they had shared was sold off to cover debts. By the start of winter, Vivian Cross was living in a modest apartment outside Gary, Indiana, a far cry from the high-rise views she had once enjoyed. Her new job, a night dispatcher for a third-rate logistics company, was a cruel mirror of the life she had lost. 4 8-hour stretches in a windowless room, lit by the hum of flickering fluorescents. She tracked semi-trucks along crowded Midwestern highways, her voice reduced to a monotone over a static-filled radio Route 42. Slow your speed near I-65. Construction ahead over. Instead of stewarding an aircraft across oceans, she guided aging trucks toward warehouses that smell of diesel and reheated coffee, replacing the scent of jet fuel she had once loved. At first, she carried her bitterness like a torch, blaming Amara Jefferson, the first officer who had reported her words, even Lucas, the gate agent, for not intervening. In her mind, they were pawns in a game of political correctness, opportunists who had ruined a career built over nearly 3 decades. But on certain nights when the dispatch room fell silent, and she caught the distant whine of a plane high above the Indiana horizon, the bitterness curdled into something she couldn't name. She would stare at the blinking lights crossing the sky and think not about Amara's calm face at the gate, but her own words by a real ticket. That's where you belong. It was the first time she wondered, not out loud, but deep enough to sting, whether she had built her career not on true integrity, but on the scaffolding of an arrogance so familiar she no longer recognized it. While Cross sank into the obscurity, she had once thought herself immune to Amara. Jefferson turned her attention towards something far greater than retribution. At Skyward Horizon's headquarters, she announced the Jefferson Legacy Program, a sweeping initiative designed to address the deeper cracks the incident had revealed. It wasn't just about pilots. It extended to every corner of the company. Scholarships were created for underrepresented youth seeking to enter aviation, not only as pilots, but as engineers, air traffic controllers, and operations managers. For employees already within Skyward, a crew advocacy line was launched, a confidential independent system where staff could report misconduct without fear of retaliation, a mechanism designed to ensure no voice, no matter how junior, could be silenced by rank again. Bias training developed. In partnership with the TSA and diversity, experts became mandatory across all operational levels, aimed at dismantling the unconscious gatekeeping attitudes that had festered for too long. The ripple effects were immediate. Lucas, the young gate agent whose composure at O'Hare had become a quiet example of professionalism, was promoted to customer operations supervisor, entrusted with redesigning boarding protocols to better support staff and passengers. Aiden Patel, the first officer whose testimony had helped bring truth to light, was placed on a fast track to captaincy, mentored personally by Evelyn, tours to prepare him not just as a pilot, but as a leader who understood the weight of the uniform he wore. Late one evening, Amara found herself standing at the glass wall of her office, looking out at the Chicago skyline. On her desk sat a framed photograph of her mother, Lorraine Jefferson, in her Skyward operations uniform from decades past. Amara traced the frame's edge with her finger and thought about the strange duality of leadership, the pride of progress, and the relentless weight of responsibility. Her mother had taught her that power was not about command, but about how one used it when tested. And now, in the wake of a scandal that could have fractured the company, Amara felt both the burden and the promise of that lesson more sharply than ever. She whispered softly, not for anyone but herself, "Power isn't loud. It's the quiet resolve to do what's right, even when the world expects you to bow." The city lights flickered beyond the window like distant stars, and somewhere in the dark, another Skyward jet roared into the night sky, carrying the promise of a company no longer chained to the old ways. It was not the end of the story, nor the victory lap many expected her to take. It was the beginning of a new era, one where Skyward Horizons would rise, not just on the strength of its planes or profits, but on a renewed promise to its people. Amara knew the road would be long, the wait unrelenting, but as she turned back to the glowing outline of the Jefferson Legacy Program's goals on her screen, she also knew that some storms are sent, not to break what's built, but to clear the air so something stronger can take flight. The hangar at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport gleamed like a cathedral of glass and steel, its high ceilings arching above the polished floor where a Skyward Horizons Airbus, a 350, sat as a silent witness to history. Beneath the shadow of its towering fuselage, rows of chairs have been set in neat lines filled with proud families, senior executives, and the first 20 graduates of the Jefferson Legacy Program. The air was thick with anticipation and emotion, the kind that lingers before a moment destined to live beyond itself. Amara Jefferson stood at the podium, the late morning light spilling across her navy suit, her hands resting on the wood as she surveyed the faces before her. Each cadet, men and women of every background, from first-generation college students to former service members and children of Skyward's ground crews, sat straighter when her gaze passed over them. These weren't just pilots earning wings. They were the first chapter in the new story she had promised to write, one built not just on flight hours and skill, but on character and humanity. When my mother, Lorraine Jefferson, first stepped into this industry, Amara began her voice even but resonant in the cavernous space. She was told over and over to be grateful for any seat at the table. She was told to keep her head down, to avoid waves, because the sky, though infinite, had little space for someone like her. She spent her life proving them wrong, not with anger, but with excellence. She taught me that the sky belongs to everyone willing to reach for it, to earn it with both their skill and their decency. Her gaze swept the room, settling on the graduates. And now you inherit that belief. But we are adding something more. At Skyward, your wings aren't just permission to fly. They are a promise. She let the words linger, her voice softening, but carrying effortlessly across the hangar. A promise to protect every passenger who steps onto your aircraft. A promise to lead every crew member with respect, no matter their rank. And most importantly, a promise to yourselves that the uniform you wear will never be a shield for arrogance, but a reminder of the responsibility you hold. These wings are heavy. They carry the dreams of your families, the trust of our passengers, and the legacy of those who fought for you to have this chance. Treat them as the honor they are. One by one, she descended from the podium to pin the silver wings onto each cadet's uniform. When she reached the final graduate, a young Latina woman with wide, tear-bright eyes, the ceremony became something more intimate. The cadet leaned closer, whispering, "My father worked as a janitor for Skyward for 25 years. He never thought he'd see this day." Amara's own throat tightened, but she smiled warmly as she fastened the wings. "Your father helped build this airline, too," she said softly. "Now it's your turn to help lead it into the sky." The applause that followed filled the vast hangar, echoing against the curved walls like rolling thunder. Amra stepped back, flanked by Aiden Patel, now wearing his captain's stripes, and Lucas, the young gate agent, turned operations supervisor, both of whom stood as quiet testaments to resilience and integrity. Together they watched as the new pilots filed toward the waiting aircraft, their faces a mixture of nerves and pride, the kind of expression only found in those standing on the threshold of a dream. As the graduates boarded for a symbolic training flight, Amara tilted her head back, following the silhouette of the jet against the bright Texas sky. The torn ticket at O'Hare, the humiliation, the storm that threatened to shake her company's foundation, all of it felt distant now, not as a scar, but as a turning point. It had been the spark for something far larger than retribution. Airlines, she thought, don't rise because of metal and engines. They rise because of people who choose to lift others with them. And as the A350 roared down the runway, its wheels leaving the earth in a smooth, powerful ascent, Amara felt the weight of the past settle into something steady, something lighter. Skyward Horizons was no longer just an airline. It was a promise fulfilled, taking flight into a new sky. Amara, Jefferson's story began as a quiet business trip, the kind of unremarkable day that executives often use to blend into the anonymity of airports. But at Chicago O'Hare, that anonymity became the spark for a reckoning. Mistaken for someone who didn't belong in the very first-class cabin she owned, Amara was humiliated by Captain Vivian Cross, a senior pilot whose arrogance had long gone unchecked. In front of a line of passengers, Cross dismissed Amara's identity, accused her of fraud, and tore apart her boarding pass, declaring that she should buy a real ticket and take her place in economy. What Cross didn't know was that the woman she sought to diminish was the CEO and principal owner of Skyward Horizons, the airline itself. That single moment of humiliation didn't just unravel Vivian Cross's career. It triggered a transformation within Skyward Horizons. Amara, guided by the lessons her late mother taught her about resilience and the true meaning of power, chose not to retaliate with rage, but with resolve. She used the incident to confront not only one pilot's prejudice, but a deeper, systemic culture that had allowed such behavior to fester unchecked. The fallout was swift. An absolute Cross was terminated, stripped of her license by the FAA, and left to rebuild her life far from the skies she once commanded. Her arrogance, once a shield, became the very weight that pulled her down. For Skyward Horizons, the storm marked a new beginning. Amara channeled the chaos into purpose. launching the Jefferson Legacy Program to elevate underrepresented voices in aviation and to ensure every employee, from the youngest gate agent to the most seasoned captain, had a voice and a system that valued integrity above ego. Figures like Lucas, the young gate agent, who stood firm in the face of Cross's pressure, and Aiden Patel, the first officer who chose truth over silence, became examples of a new skyward culture, one where courage, not complacency, was a standard. The story reached its most powerful note at the graduation ceremony of the program's first cadet class. Against the backdrop of a gleaming skyward jet, Amara reminded the new generation of aviators that their wings weren't just licenses to fly, but promises to lead with empathy and uphold the dignity of everyone they serve. In that moment, Skyward Horizons was no longer just an airline. It had become a symbol of what happens when leadership refuses to bow to old systems and instead dares to build something better, even when the path begins with a moment of deep personal injustice. The lesson from Amara: Jefferson's journey is not just about corporate reform or one woman's triumph. It is about the choices we face when confronted with unfairness, arrogance, or prejudice in our own lives. We can meet these storms with anger that burns out quickly, or we can stand calm, let the storm reveal the truth, and use that truth to spark lasting change in workplaces, communities, and even within families. The quiet strength to act with integrity can dismantle entire structures of bias and build something far stronger in their place. It reminds us that real power is not loud or forceful. It is steady, patient, and anchored in doing what is right even when the world expects us to bow. If Amara's story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the importance of courage and compassion in the face of injustice, support us by subscribing to our channel. Your encouragement helps us share more stories that matter, stories of resilience, justice, and the people who choose to rise above. Hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and stay with us as we bring you more true stories that will keep you inspired and remind you that change is always possible, even when it starts with something as small as a torn picket.